Spring is officially here, which means it's time to get these bikes back out on the road. Today I'm going to give you 8 tips to make sure that your first ride doesn't leave you stranded. I'm Grease, you're watching Grease's Garage, and I'm going to help you skip the struggle. All right, guys, so as we jump into this, one quick note, I have a separate video for pretty much every tip on this list. So if you're hearing me talk about something and you don't know how to do it, just look up in the top corner of the screen, click through to that video, and I'll walk you through it in more detail. So let's get started with number 1, and that is to check your battery. The fine points of checking your battery are these. You want to see 12.5 volts when the bike is off and you're just putting those multimeter prongs across the battery. Once you've got that 12.5, start the bike up, give it a little bit of throttle, and then you want to see 14.5 volts. If you're not seeing at least 14 volts when you give it a little bit of twist, you have an issue with your charging system, and you need to look at that now before you take that bike out for the first ride. Last but not least, if you see any bulging on the battery, that's just an automatic sign that you need to throw it in the garbage, get a fresh battery. Tip number 2 is to inspect your brakes. Now, if you, like me, are running a single brake on your bike, as you can see, there's no front brake on this thing, it is very, very important that you check your brake pads. Every set of brake calipers typically has an inspection port on the back. That's what you're seeing on screen right now. You want to take a look at these sections right here. These are the pads. If these pads are worn down significantly, just put a fresh set in. It is way too inexpensive to worry about whether they can make it another season or not. Don't take the chance. If they're your only brake, just replace them. I gotta move my leg for this one because tip number 3 is to clean your carburetor. As you can see, I've got the world's greatest carburetor here on this bike. This is an S&S Super E. I love this carburetor. It does, however, need a cleaning from time to time. So a good practice when the season starts is just to remove your carb from the bike, give it a full clean, spray it out with Carb Clean, and make sure you check out my full video on opening up the S&S Super E, linked right up there in the corner if you've never done it before. Next step on the preseason checklist is to tension and align your chain. Now, if you recognize this little tool right here, this is a Motion Pro chain alignment tool. I've got a whole video that you can check out that shows you how to use it, but this thing makes it so super simple to get that alignment proper, and you cannot always rely on the old axle adjuster method. Check out that video to see more details, but making sure your chain is properly aligned and properly tensioned is a good practice, especially if you, like most jobber guys, tend not to check it throughout the entire season. If you've been watching my channel long enough, you know I'm a fan of these big, chunky front and rear tires, which means I need lots and lots of air to stuff into these big balloons to make sure they can go down the road properly, which takes us to our next step, which is checking your tire pressure. This is another one of those ones that most chopper guys tend to not do for the entire season, and it can get you in some trouble. So in the beginning of the season, even if it's the only time you do it, check the tire pressure on your front and rear. And yes, us hardtail guys do tend to run, I run about 10 PSI less in my rear tire than I do in my front tire. I can't give you the exact tire pressure because it's based on the tires you're running. So whatever you're running in your front, you might consider decreasing it by 10 in the rear to give yourself a little bit smoother ride on that hardtail. This is also a good time to check the tread on the tires. If you put down a lot of miles and those tires are looking super bald, this is a good time to swap them out, especially if you have to drop it off at a shop and it takes a couple days for them to get you into the rotation. Better to find out now and get it done while you've got the time than once the rides start coming and then you end up missing out because you don't have a set of tires on there. Next item on our list is to check your oil. Now, on my bike, I've got engine oil, which you can see in the horseshoe tank right here. I have transmission oil, and I do not have primary oil because I have an open primary. But if you have a primary, you should do all 3 of those oil changes right now while nothing is going on, so you're ready for the full season ahead. And now, if you do have primary fluid, but you're sick and tired of changing it and changing gaskets related to it, this is a perfect time to upgrade to an open primary. I have a full buyer's guide on how to pick the proper primary for your bike. Check that video out in the link right up here. Guys, we are getting very close to the end of this list, but before we go any further, I just want to remind you to take a minute to subscribe to the channel. If you watch all my videos and you love seeing them pop up in your feed, but you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do that so that we can keep growing this channel and pushing it out to more chopper guys. Moving on to our next tip, which is to check your ignition system. Now, this really is a tip that's specific to people like me that are running points. And if you're also running points in your bike, the beginning of the season is a great time to reset your points gap. Make sure that it's set properly so that it doesn't leave you stranded on the side of the road. I have found that setting it in the beginning of the season is usually enough for me to run the entire way through, but those shoes on the points do wear down over time. So it's always a good idea to start the season fresh, reset your points gap, and then you're good to go. The next tip I've got for you guys is super important. I want you to look over your entire motorcycle for any missing hardware. This is super key. You would not be surprised, I'm sure, to find that these bikes shake a lot and hardware tends to go missing. I myself discovered before shooting this video that my transmission plate had actually lost one of the nuts off of the bottom, and so the transmission plate was only held down in 3 places. Not a good way to ride your motorcycle. So I was able to put a new nut on there, get that back to where it's supposed to be. Make sure you take that time before you start your season, especially things in the rear end. Make sure things are torqued, things are tight, that you're not missing anything that's going to cause your bike to come out of alignment when you're flying down the highway. Now that you are familiar with all the steps you ought to take to get your bike ready for the season, the final step in your journey is to click on this playlist right here. This playlist has links to every process that I described. So if you don't know how to set your points gap, or you don't know how to change your transmission fluid, or you don't know how to test your battery, all of those videos are right up there in that playlist. Click on that, take the information you got in today's video and apply it to your bike before the season gets going. Thanks for watching Grease's Garage, and I'll catch you guys on the road.